Hello and welcome to the first dev video for Starship Simulator, our upcoming title where you get to live and work as part of the crew on a deep space exploration vessel. And given that this is our first video, I thought I'd just go over some of our motivations behind the project and what our long-term goals are for the game. Now, for many years now I've been a big fan of both engineering, architecture and indeed spaceships. And when it came to designing a game of this nature, from the outset I was keen to make it as realistic as possible, to the point where I was quite insistent that we start from the very literal steel framework of the spacecraft. And in fact I've been very much inspired by watching what SpaceX are doing in Boca Chica, building their Starship program. And I wanted to approach this in the same way, so we prototype the framework and the structure, and we try and build the ship in a way that makes the most sense from an engineering perspective. And so you can see here that we have every aspect of the physical structure modelled out here. Obviously this piece is a work in progress. But through these girders we'll have holes routed for things like the cables, the pipework, and the various bits of machinery that help make this into a workable space vessel. Now the area we're in at the moment is what will be the main crew's mess hall. And you can see here this big cavernous space is the part of the ship that hasn't yet been really fleshed out very much. But this will contain things like the arboretum, the shuttle bay, the main engines, and all the big stuff pretty much. So if we head on into the actual centre of the ship, I just switch to third person. Some of this may look a little bit odd because it's still under construction. So right now we're on D-Deck, and D-Deck is one of the main habitation levels. Split between D-Deck and E-Deck above, there are 300 of these crew quarters, and they will be for all of the enlisted crew. And as you can see, it's a series of concentric rings, each of which are lined by the crew quarters themselves. The E and the D decks are basically a self-contained city aboard the ship, and they will contain everything that the crew needs to live a comfortable life in space, given that this ship is designed for long-term space exploration. And again, as I go around the corridors here, you can see that the steel framework is visible, where I haven't yet added all the wall panels in. And these holes here are going to be for all the cables and things which supply power to the lights and data, so that we can turn the lights on and off and change colours and things. And all of that will work in real time and will be a large interconnected system. So for example, if one of these cables were to break, it might actually turn all of these lights off down the rest of the corridor. And that will form part of the engineer gameplay. And not just the engineer, but there'll also be a number of other roles that the player can perform, everywhere from the chef to a scientist, a medical officer, all the way up to the captain. So if I just work my way towards the centre of the ship, I'll try not to get lost. So again, lots of this is still a work in progress, so these will be proper stairs when they're finished. So this is E-Deck, very similar to D-Deck below. It's going to consist pretty much entirely of crew quarters, and along with all the support and infrastructure that they need. Moving on up to C-Deck. C-Deck's going to be the main science deck, so here you'll have all the science labs and all the various science disciplines. And up here we have B-Deck, which is the main administrative level. So if I just jog around the corner here. So here we have the administration office, and again it's very much a work in progress, but this will be where you have meeting rooms and HR and that kind of thing. Also up on B-Deck you have the VIP officers' quarters, essentially, the staterooms. These are a more luxurious form of crew quarters, and these are the only ones that have physical windows looking out into space. They'll have a small kitchen area here when it's finished, a comfortable lounge area, and a separate bedroom and ensuite bathroom. Again, it's just blocking out at this stage, getting a feel for the size of the rooms. And it's worth noting, actually, from a design perspective, we've designed the crew quarters so that they are individual modular units that are prefabricated in the factory. And the idea is that they are installed into the ship during its construction process even, and on the outside of the crew quarters will be a hookup for things like data, power, plumbing, that kind of thing. They'll also have their own independent limited oxygen supply and will be airtight, so the crew can use their quarters as a lifeboat if necessary, or at least a place of safety. Okay, if we move on round, I'll just take a quick nose down the lift shaft. So you can see here that's currently 6 decks down. There's no lift access to the 7th deck, as that's the lower section of engineering. Okay, moving on into here, this is going to be the officers' lounge, a comfortable space for the senior staff to relax after they've had their shift. And you'll notice these donuts strewn all over the floor. And the reason for that is I've been experimenting with a system of having the internals of the ship react to things happening on the outside. So if we, for example, have a weapons strike, or we just run into an asteroid or something, then you can see that objects on the inside of the ship can get knocked off of shelves, and you'll have plates and cups falling off of tables and things, just to get a little bit more immersion on the ship. And speaking of tables, these aren't actually the final tables, they're just a bit of garden furniture for scale. This will eventually be a bar, serving drinks to the officers. This will be a much more ornate staircase when it's finished. Then we have a mezzanine here with what will be the captain's table, although I may make this into a lounge type area with a sofa and a coffee table. So moving on up here, we have the command deck, and again we've got some bare steel work here because it's still under construction. Starting on the right, we have the conference room, and opposite there we have the XO's office, the first officer's office, and then we have the captain's ready room. And opposite there, a bathroom, which, again, is still under construction. And now we move into the command centre itself, the bridge. The bridge is one of the more completed areas of the ship, although it still needs a fair bit of work in places, namely along the back here and some sections of the ceiling. But if I just go through the individual stations, over here we've got what will be the engineering station for propulsion systems, again engineering for power systems. We'll have internal security over here, damage control and internal environmental support. And at the front here, of course, we have the captain and first officer's chairs, and I've designed these so that the captain can choose either side, that there's no set chair for the captain. Depends on their preference, whether they're left or right-handed, for example. Down here we have the science console, which I'll come back to, the nav console. On the opposite side we have the tactical console and communications, and the front here we've got the home console, of course. And you'll notice that following me on the floor there, or rather hovering above the floor, is the hologrammatic orrery map, and this is being projected down by the projector on the ceiling. And this is really the focal point of the bridge, which is why the consoles themselves face inward, because this is going to be the main information display, what would traditionally be a view screen. And here you'll be able to see information such as what you have targeted, where you are, the status of the ship, or all manner of various bits of information, and this is all going to be controlled from the command console here. Now right now it's just controlling the orrery map, but you'll be able to select different modes depending on what you need to see. So here you can see we can raise the map up and down, although I do need to make it a little bit darker. And then you can change the scale to see the full extent of the system that you happen to be in at the time. So of course, with this being a space exploration game, one of the key points is actually exploring space. And to that end, the ship is fully flyable in real time. So if I just press the helm buttons randomly here, you can see that we have full control over the ship. So despite it being well over 300 rooms over 7 decks, the ship is very much a real vessel that you can still fly around space. So let's go and pick a location here. So if I switch to first person and have a look at this console, this is our first iteration of the UNOS interface, and that stands for United Nations Operating System. And this is going to be a consistent design across all panels on the ship. And right now it just shows the targets that are in its current sensor range, and you'll be able to change these using these buttons here, which aren't actually enabled yet. But if we just target Mars, for example, and hop on over here to the helm and engage the warp drive, we should see Mars looming large. So the planets themselves are 1:1 scale, so this is a true scale Mars that we're looking at here. And I'm keen to have true scale everything in the game, so to really appreciate how big space is. The game is very much focused on realism and the real science behind space exploration, which is why here, for example, you can see the various zones around our sun. So you have the habitable zone here, for example, and the frost line beyond. And if you go over to this console again, the way the gameplay loop is going to work in terms of space exploration is if we just hit this button here, you can see that we can randomly select all manner of different stars. And in the game proper, there will be a proper way of navigating through space, but for now we can just randomly select star systems from a pool of over 2 billion, and they're all completely unique. So if we just let's pick not an M class, there we go, a G class. So we perform a long range scan of that star, and we can see that there are 7 signals, so that will correspond to 7 orbiting bodies. So we lock the FTL target, and that will now allow the helm to then engage the FTL, so we just kind of try not to crash into Mars. And in just a few moments we will arrive at our destination. Again, in the game proper, we'll probably have it so each light year travelled is a full day's work on the ship. So you'll get up in your crew quarters and perform your day's duties, and that will be 1 light year travelled in space. As you can see there, the sun is nice and bright, and the surface detail of the star is completely procedurally generated, and again there are over 2 billion possible combinations. So now that we're at this star system, the next thing we want to do is see what's actually here. So we'll do another scan of the local system. So there's a few interesting targets there. Now the important thing to note is that the region around the star is being calculated based on actual physics. So it takes the Kelvin value of the star and its luminosity in order to generate the various zones. So the habitable zone here, the frost line beyond, and it uses that information to generate which type of planets will appear in those regions. So the planets themselves could be anywhere within the system, but depending on their location, it will use their distance from the sun, or the star, and their luminosity, or their albedo rather, and their atmospheric density to work out what their surface temperature, or equilibrium temperature, would actually be. And it uses all of that data to formulate what type of planet it would be. So here, for example, you can see a lava planet here in close orbit to the star. In fact, let's go and have a look at that one. So if we just target the lava planet there, it's only 0.1 AU away from its star. Just back up so we can get the full view. And there we have our lava planet. You can't really tell from this far away, but the lava is actually moving on the surface. And we've got some what looks like clouds there as well. Again, this is completely procedurally generated, and again, over 2 billion possible combinations. So if we have another look here, so we've also got there planet B. It's a rocky planet just skirting the outside of the habitable zone. So it's worth looking at that one just to see if it's an Earth-like. Which one was it? It was B, wasn't it? There we go. So let's have a look at that one. Let's see if we get an Earth-like. Yeah, no, looks like it's too cold. So you can see that the atmosphere definitely isn't oxygen rich. Looks like it's possibly a methane atmosphere, and it's a frozen ball, so not one that will support life. And it's important to note that the plans for the game is that the universe will be full of life. So if you find a potentially habitable planet, it could have life on there ranging from simple bacterial life with microbes all the way up to complex life and indeed advanced civilizations. And in fact, those civilizations could be millions of years more advanced than you. And you won't know until approaching them whether they are friendly or hostile or neutral. So depending on the roll of the dice, you could find perhaps an incredibly hostile race which are relatively primitive and pose no threat at all, or you could find a race which is incredibly hostile and technologically far in advance of you, and your only recourse is to run as fast as you can. But the game is going to be all about those first contact scenarios and discovering these worlds with interesting life forms. So while we're at this system, let's just have a look at the Class 1 gas giant. The Class 1s are generally the prettiest, very much like Jupiter. And I'll get a bit closer to this one so we can have a look. That's a strange one. Again, the planet's completely procedural, and has a lot of moving cloud layers that you can't quite see from this far away, so we'll get a bit closer. Just lower our orbit. Right now this is all happening very quickly. The actual completed system for navigating in orbit will rely on targeting certain locations within the planet's orbit, warping to those locations, and then travelling around at sublight speeds. It's a very, very cloudy one, this. You can't hardly make out any detail. But you'll be able to scan them and take a look at the makeup of the planet's atmosphere and whether or not it contains life, or indeed useful chemicals, because part of the gameplay will also be maintaining the ship, and it will need fuel, during its travels, and that's going to involve either scooping gases from certain locations or mining asteroids. Okay, let's have a look at another star system. Let's go for a M class. So the M-class stars are the red dwarfs. They're usually the least interesting to look at. Although, because they're a deep red colour, they're the nicest up close. Definitely my favourite kind of star. Although, in terms of what you generally find around them, it's very rare to find a habitable world, simply because the temperature's so low. Like in this one, they're all just ice planets, but we'll go and have a look at one anyway. There we can see the ice planet, and all the cracked sheets of ice. Again, all procedurally generated. And the interesting thing here is that the light that the star is emitting is its true Kelvin value. And I imagine the true colour of the planet's surface is probably a shade of blue looking at it. It has a bit of a green tinge to it. So when you combine the bluish, or probably kind of aqua colour with the orange light, you get this interesting green. But all the lighting is properly calculated, so what you see is what it should look like in real life. Okay, so there's a brief overview of what the game's all about. Again, as the development continues, we'll release more videos discussing all of the various tools and systems in more detail, but hopefully that was a good taster as to what to expect in the future. If you love the project, then please do support it, and if you want to try it out yourself, we are currently operating an early access program for our Patreons and our PayPal donators. We'll provide details for this in the description below. Thanks for watching, and hopefully we should expect to see more soon.